On November 3, 2007, Colleen Munson, a wary convenience store employee, returned home after a long Friday night shift. She was looking forward to a fun weekend with her young daughter, Rowan Ford. However, when she entered her house, she wasn't greeted by her lovely girl. She ventured further into the house, thinking her daughter probably didn't hear the door. However, the emptiness of her daughter's room gripped her, and uneasiness only grew when she couldn't find the girl anywhere in the house. She ran to her husband, David Spears' room, who was still fast asleep in his bed. The man was jolted awake by his wife, who asked him where their daughter was. Comforting her, he said that she was out at some friend's house for sleepover. However, when asked to name the friend, he was at a loss for words. Panic flooded Colleen's system. Her daughter was missing, and nobody knew when she left the house. Minutes turned into hours, and the mother frantically visited every house in the neighborhood, but in vain. Finally, her worry outweighed her patience, and she dialed 911 and called the Newton County Sheriff's Department. Where did the young girl vanish to in the middle of the night? Why was she not at any of her friends' houses, as mentioned by the stepfather? Rowan Damia Ford was born on April 11, 1998, in the Californian city of San Diego. She'd moved to the town of Stella in Missouri with her mom after she divorced her dad. There, she studied at Triway Elementary School and was an active member of the Stella Baptist Church. While she was usually seen riding her blue bike or playing near her house, her mom, Colleen Munson, found no trace of her when she arrived home at 9 a.m. on November 3, 2007. She'd left Rowan in the care of her stepdad, David Spears, who didn't really know where she was. David later told his wife that he'd gotten heavily drunk with his friends the previous night of November 2, 2007. When the Newton County Police arrived, David told them that Rowan was fast asleep in her bed when his friends, Chris Collings and Nathan Mauran, had arrived at his house the previous night. He said that he bought some alcohol with them and played pool at the house before leaving for another round of booze and drinking at the farm where the trio worked. David later mentioned that Chris asked Nathan to drop him home since he couldn't drive due to being intoxicated. Chris also convinced David to go along, and they drove to Chris's mobile home, where they again drank more liquor, which they'd bought on the way. However, David admitted the fact that they'd also smoked weed, which was illegal in the state of Missouri at the time and wasn't legalized until 2022. The stepfather said that he came back home with Nathan via the back roads instead of using the State Highway 8, since they didn't want to get caught by the police for driving drunk. He said Nathan dropped him and left around midnight, and this was when Rowan asked him if she could go and sleep over at a friend's place. The cops suspected that David was lying to them, since his story wasn't concrete enough. They also didn't buy the fact that he forgot to ask where Rowan went just because he was drunk. How could a person allow a young girl to just walk out of the house so late in the night? What was the stepdad of the missing kid hiding from the cops? The police saw David, as well as his friends, Chris and Nathan, as persons of interest in the case. Chris, in particular, drew their interest since he was a family friend of David and Colleen. Apparently, he used to live with them in their basement for the previous summer and fall, before moving out in October 2007 to a trailer parked near a farm his parents owned. When the cops reached his house, he was surprised by the news of Rowan's missing and said that he'd not heard from David since the previous night. He repeated the same story as his friend, and the police said that he was concerned, cooperative, and well-mannered. Chris later went to Rowan's house and saw Colleen and comforted her. 2 days passed without any sign of the missing child, and due to the known interstate aspect, the FBI got involved in the case on November 5, 2007. Chris was brought in for questioning once again at the Newton County Sheriff's Department and was read his rights. He chose not to make use of any of his rights and cooperated with the questioning. While exiting the police station, Chris came across a longtime family friend and confidant of his, Sheriff Clinton Clark, who was at the station as part of a routine patrol. Sheriff Clark had known Chris for over 17 years and was also a good friend of his adoptive parents. The young man often reached out to the sheriff to talk about stuff and ask his advice on various matters. The disappearance of Rowan became one of them. Would this finally be the time at which the cooperating witness of the police would cough up the hidden information regarding the missing girl? The feds went to Colleen's house one more time to question her. They saw Chris was also there, and they questioned both of them separately about the events that had transpired. Chris cooperated and also said that he was ready to wear a wire and speak to David about his missing daughter. The authorities denied going through with this, after which Chris gave them information about several locations in Stella and the neighboring woods where they could find Rowan. The next day, on November 6, 2007, the police drove David through all the locations mentioned by Chris and continued searching for the missing girl. However, this exercise proved to be futile. Chris narrated the same story to Sheriff Clark and also told him that he spoke to the FBI regarding the case as well. The officer also felt that he was withholding information and relayed his conversation with Chris to the FBI. Learning that they had a potential source to siphon information, the feds asked Clark to stick close to the potential witness in the abduction case. They believed that Chris was the key to the entire case and would be vital in providing incriminating evidence against Rowan's stepfather. Chris was called to the Newton County Sheriff's Department on November 7, 2007, where he was asked for his DNA samples. However, the FBI could see that Chris was visibly more intense and emotionally distraught when speaking about Rowan this time. As the cops closed in on him, Chris told them that if they tried an accusatory approach with them in the disappearance of Rowan, then he wouldn't be cooperating and talking with them. A frustrated Chris spoke to Clark about what happened during the questioning and the kind of treatment he received. He also said that he was thinking about getting the services of a lawyer. The sheriff said that he understood his frustration, but advised him that lawyering up at this point wouldn't be in his best interest. He also said that a smooth relationship with the authorities would be beneficial and would also help in finding Rowan faster. The sheriff assured Chris that he could always reach out and talk to him about anything. This made the young man tear up and started to cry in Clark's cabin. He told the sheriff that he really loved Rowan and wouldn't do anything to hurt her. Before he could continue, someone walked into Clark's office, following which Chris left the police station immediately. What key information was he hiding from the police? Were the police right about Chris being the key to the entire case? Clark called the FBI and told them everything about his conversation with Chris. The sheriff said that the witness in the case was on the verge of divulging everything to him. However, he also asked the feds to back off for a day and not pursue Chris since he was thinking about lawyering up. The federal officers agreed to it. The sheriff asked the FBI to locate the body of Rowan as soon as they could, as that would prompt Chris into talking. On November 8, 2007, the feds didn't make any contact with Chris as directed by Clark. The next day, after a grueling week-long search by the local community and the authorities, Rowan's body was found in a 20-foot deep sinkhole called the Fox's Cave on November 9, 2007. The location was several miles from her house. The body didn't have any clothing on from the waist down, barring a single sock. The body was recovered from the hole in a decaying state, covered in several tiny cuts and bruises. The autopsy revealed that Rowan's body had lacerations from front to back, which was consistent with. The test determined that the cause of her death was strangulation, and her neck carried ligature marks. Her face also had significant trauma that was likely caused by the fall into the deep sinkhole. Clark received the news of the body's discovery via television and was contacted by the police department, saying that Chris had stopped by and was asking for him. Later, the sheriff received a call from Chris, who asked him if the FBI was trailing him in a gray minivan. Clark told him that he wasn't aware of any surveillance team on his tail. Chris said that he'd been driving around town for a long time and tried shaking his pursuers off, but to no avail. Clark asked him to come to the police station and meet him. At the station, Chris said now that the body had been discovered, people in the neighborhood could have been trying to take matters into their own hands. The sheriff told him that he couldn't offer him protection round the clock, and if he knew something, now was the time to talk. He read him his rights once again, which made Chris cry. Seeing this, Clark directly asked him to confess everything he knew about David Spears' involvement in the disappearance of Rowan and get it over with. This surprised Chris, and he gave the officer a funny look. He said that he would tell him everything, but not at the police station since there were too many people around. Chris asked Clark to meet him at the Muncie Bridge to speak about what he knew. When they reached the location, Chris held out his hands for the sheriff and asked him to place handcuffs around them. Clark said that there wasn't any need for it, to which he replied, "For what I'm about to tell you, you will." He narrated the same story that he'd been repeating the whole week, but there was a change from the time when David and Nathan left his trailer. He said that while they took the back roads, Chris knew that he could reach David's house faster if he took State Highway 8, the shortest route to the house. Once he reached there, he entered Rowan's room, picked her up while she was asleep, and placed her in his pickup truck. He drove her back to his trailer while she remained asleep during the ride. He placed Rowan on his bed but didn't turn the lights on. He also said that he didn't speak a word to prevent her from identifying his voice. He admitted to undressing and assaulting Rowan. He also said that during his act, she woke up due to the pain, but he carried on and was going to return her to her house. He held the girl in front of him strongly with his arms and escorted her out of the trailer. However, the moonlight was too bright that night, and Rowan turned around and saw his face, instantly recognizing her assaulter. Chris said he panicked and used a chicken house rope, wound it around Rowan's neck, and pulled it really hard. After ensuring that she was dead, he put the body in his pickup truck and drove away, thinking of a place to dispose of her. He told Clark that he initially planned to throw the body off the Muncie Bridge into the floating water. He ditched the idea, however, realizing that the corpse would get discovered very quickly if he did so. He drove around town thinking of several places in the woods when the thought of Fox Cave struck him. He dumped the body inside and tried to cover the sinkhole with tree branches and debris. However, because the pit was too big, everything simply fell inside. Chris returned to his property and began getting rid of all the evidence. Turning on the lights, he noticed a lot of blood on his mattress and his clothing. He picked up Rowan's clothes and the rope he used for the murder and burned them in a wood stove. However, he couldn't do the same with the mattress, as that would have attracted attention of the neighborhood. Thus, he went inside a barn on his property, rolled the mattress inside a 55-gallon barrel, and burned it inside. With this, he ended his confession to Clark and said he was ready to relay the same story to the police now. The sheriff drove him to the Wheaton Police Department without handcuffing him. Chris was seen smoking a cigarette when he exited the car. The police of Newton County, where the case was reported, and Barry County, where Rowan's body was found, along with the FBI, arrived to hear Chris's statement. He said that he was remorseful of his actions and had spent several hours crying that afternoon. Everyone was shocked to find that the person they thought was their guiding light in the case turned out to be the criminal that they were looking for. In fact, the man they thought was behind everything, David Spears, was just a drunk, innocent man after all. However, this wasn't the end of the story. In fact, what the police found next utterly confused them. The police searched Chris's property after his confession once again and found an old pickup truck. They recovered a 55-gallon barrel with burnt remains of a twine cord. A few strands of light brown hair that matched Rowan's were also found on Chris's bed. The police finally had their man, and they headed to inform David, their former prime suspect and the girl's stepdad. The cops expected David to break down or get shocked by the betrayal. However, when he learned that his buddy had surrendered, he implicated himself in the case as well. This unexpected development completely took them by surprise. He said that he was aware of what happened and, in fact, had caught Chris in the act in his trailer. However, instead of confronting him, David said that he joined him in the assault and later helped him with the disposal of the body. He also said that he'd taken his mom's truck for this purpose around 1:30 a.m., which was confirmed by his mother as well. When Chris was asked about this, he adamantly denied any involvement of David in the acts of violation, murder, or corpse disposal. This completely baffled the cops, as they now had two perpetrators who were both confessing to the crime. This was a twist none of the detectives anticipated, leaving them on the edge. On December 21, 2007, Chris Collings was presented before Judge Victor W. Head at the Barry County Associate Circuit Court. He was charged with first-degree murder, forcible rape, and statutory rape of Rowan Damia Ford. On the other hand, David was also charged with the same crimes, but his case wasn't closed by the time Chris was convicted. Moreover, no next date was chosen for his hearing. Colleen, Rowan's mom, was inconsolable at the time and had filed for divorce on November 27, 2007. On the day of his arraignment, Chris was sentenced to death on January 22, 2008. He appealed against the sentence in 2012 and also filed a motion to exclude all evidence obtained from his property, pickup truck, and videotaped confessions. This, however, was overruled by the court. His lawyers also pointed to David, whose mom's truck hadn't yielded any evidence, but the canine dogs of the police did pick up Rowan's scent inside. The judges, however, unanimously upheld his death sentence on August 19, 2014, and found nothing reversible in any of the convictions. Despite this, the judges unanimously noted that Chris was always the one who initiated contact with Sheriff Clark and met with them whenever he wanted to. Thus, he was never forced to make any confession. Hence, Chris's second appeal failed as well, and the judges upheld the death sentence on March 6, 2018. However, as of May 2024, Chris is still alive.
Public defenders say Collings' conversations with a police officer he knew, pictures of Rowan Ford's lifeless body used as evidence, and physical evidence not relevant to the case caused jurors to make an emotional rather than a legal decision when they chose the death penalty.
But while he still had no way out of the system, Rowan's stepdad, David Spears' sentencing was more controversial. According to Barry County Associate Circuit Court's prosecutor Johnny Cox, this would put the state in a position of arguing inconsistent theories of who actually strangled Rowan Ford. The state would have to argue that both versions are true, even if they both cannot be true. He also noted that without any incriminating evidence, like DNA, he couldn't ask the jury to deliver a death sentence for anybody. The prosecutor also said that moving forward with David's confession would have resulted in the undoing of Chris's conviction. The prosecution did accuse David of trying to mislead the investigation and the jury with a false confession. In a 2010 hearing, David was sentenced to 11 years in prison for child endangerment and hindering prosecution. As of May 2024, he completed his sentence and is a free man once again. Rowan's funeral was held on November 14, 2007 at the Gospel Lighthouse Church. She was cremated at the Macedonia Cemetery in Stella. Her tombstone carried the engraving of a kneeling angel and a heart. Several questions arose regarding the sentencing of both Chris and David. One could argue that if David's confession had been considered true, then both men would have received the death penalty. However, it's argued that no evidence incriminating David was found, and thus, using his statement would have freed Chris as well. Chris was 32 years old when he assaulted and killed Rowan, and was 6 foot 8 inches tall and weighed 284 pounds. It's completely unimaginable what the young girl would have gone through in her final moments that unfateful night. During the time her killer lived in her house, she affectionately called him Uncle Chris, which makes everything even more depressing. Sadly, while her life was viciously ended, her killers continue to live on.